All right, welcome back. Now, almost 2 weeks ago, the two leading presidential candidates unveiled their running mates. Both Martha Karua and Rigathi Gachagua are from the vote-rich Mount Kenya region and have hit the ground running to mobilize the electorate. Tonight on the Voters Hub, we take a look at the impact the running mate choices will have on Election Day, and that is now 2 months away. Well, my panelists tonight are Dr. Tom Wolfe, political analyst and senior researcher at Tifa Research, and Ruth Bolo, chairperson for the International Relations Committee at the Young Democrat Union of Africa. Thank you both for joining me tonight. I should be calling you repeat offenders on Voters Hub for the amount of times you've been on this show. But Tom,
more often than
you. Let me begin with you as to why the running mate factor was so much more, I guess, important this time around than, say, other election cycles. Why was it such a big deal?
Well, thank you again for having us. I don't know really how we would compare the past two elections under this Constitution in terms of the importance of running mates. We would have to spend quite a bit of analytical time deciding and agreeing what we mean by important. But at the latter part of your question, there certainly was much more drama this time. Mainly for the obvious reason that the announcement, both announcements, came so close to the deadline.
Yeah.
Whereas in the previous two elections, well, the past election, 2017, it was known, of course, that the president and deputy were going to run again. So there's no drama there.
Right.
And it was, even after Musalia Mudavadi joined and CORD became NASA in April, there was really very little doubt that there wouldn't be the repeat pair of Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka last time. In 2013, after we had the rally in, I guess it was a prayer rally in mid-2012 in Afrafa Stadium in Nakuru, the coming together of William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta, still in the aftermath of the very strong memories of the post-election violence in 2008, there was no doubt, ICC or no ICC, that was going to be the pair. In fact, some people joked and said it was a marriage presided over by the priest known as Ocampo that brought them together in unity against the ICC. The pairing of Raila and Kalonzo came a little bit later, but nothing like this time where we had to wait for the last 48 hours. And the drama, part of the drama was, who was going to go first?
Right.
Would it be to the advantage of one of the two to wait and make the other one play his cards and see how to respond? Or would it be the advantage of one of them to go first and say, nimecheza karate yangu sasa wewe namna gani? So there was a lot of excitement, drama, tension, whether at the end of the day, in terms of who wins the election, who went first, and who didn't, or even what the picks are, that will be a challenge for research to try to discover when the election's over.
You know, Ruth, through this process, the understanding is the running mate brings to the ticket what the presidential candidate does not have. And so when you look at the two running mate choices, what do they bring to their respective tickets?
You know, what you described is the ideal situation. But if you look at how things have been happening of late, it's been more of which presidential candidate will bring me more votes. And so for a very long time, the conversation amongst the citizens was not who, by the way, you know, the electorates was not, you know, what level of integrity do this, you know, the people who have been shortlisted for vice president on both divides, what kind of track record do they have? It was not that. It was more of, you know, me as a supporter of this divide, who do I feel is going to bring more votes for my presidential candidate? Right. So there was very little discussion as to what the running mates will be bringing in terms of, you know, their track record, their integrity, what kind of principles and values they have. It was more of what are they going to bring? Are they going to bring me a vote from this particular tribal bloc, or from this particular gender, or from this particular group of, you know, people from across the social classes? So that's why I said what you've described is the ideal situation. But the reality is a bit far from what has been happening.
Tom, you want to respond? I can see your face.
Again, this is a very interesting, complicated subject. Let me just say, due to time limits, from what I've read and heard, the deputy president's choice, Rigathi, was centered around two main objectives. One, to take advantage of the lead that all the polls had showed that the deputy president was enjoying on the mountain anyway,
right.
About twice as popular as Raila in a couple of Tifa polls, based not only or simply on his ethnic identity, but his reputed skills in mobilizing voters. That he's supposed to be very much an on-the-ground guy who knows how to get people out. And then also, we're told, his abundant resources. Martha Karua, on the other hand, by comparison, is weak on both of those counts. She only got about 40% of the vote against N.Y. Guru in the Kirinyaga race for governor. I mean, that's fairly good, but certainly not enough to win. And she's certainly not known for having huge bank accounts. But she added, I think, or she adds something aside from turnout necessarily on the mountain.
Yeah.
Having her personal national political history, and even leading up to the Supreme Court's verdict on BBI, her very prominent role in Linda Katiba, interestingly, on the opposite side of the former prime minister, she's seen as someone who's very independent. And as we saw in the news conference yesterday by a number of these governance NGO people, she, I think, helps to dilute the perception, which has been there in some quarters, that Raila had become, rightly or wrongly, the system's candidate, which was even articulated by his brother a year or so ago. So I think she really adds, leave aside the gender issue, I think she adds some credibility to his candidacy that goes beyond just vote mobilization on the mountain, let alone personal resources, however badly they are needed in campaigns.
Yeah.
So allow me to just jump in. From what Tom is saying, it's clearly an election of narratives. Right from the word go, it was an election of dynasty versus hustler. It is now an election of, what ethnic tribe, what ethnicity does he or she come from? Whoever we're going to pick as a running mate. While ideally we should be asking ourselves, what does this person represent? And if you hear what he's saying, it is assumed that, the DP's running mate has got some source of wealth. And it's also assumed that the, former prime minister's running mate has got civil society behind her. So it's all these narratives, purely narratives. I really look forward to the running mates debate. That should be quite interesting because then we would actually know who are they away from the rallies, who are they away from their heads, for lack of a better word, or the people they would be deputizing. It's at that point that we'll really get to know them for who they are, because a lot of what we have right now about both running mates is assumptions. I mean, there was an assumption that then Rigathi Gachagua would bring in not just the money bit of it, but would also, and not just the votes from Central, but he would bring together the business class. But we don't see that happening. There was also an assumption that, Honorable Martha Karua will be bringing together this group of people, but we haven't seen that yet. So I really feel like that is one debate that will allow us to see who are these two, because right now, both divides are neck to neck. And there needs to be something that will clearly tell the citizens, this is who your running mates are, because the other two, we've known them. We've seen them the past couple of years. We've been following them. So we sort of know what they stand for. And that's why he's saying when both of them came on board, then it sort of changed the perceptions we had about both of them just a little. So we actually need to know, are the perceptions we have right or wrong?
I mean, let's talk about narratives, because something that did come out strongly after, especially Martha Karua's pick, was the gender card. And how much of a factor that would be. Would it resonate with women voters? Would we actually see this kind of mobilize them? From where you sit, Ruth, do you feel that it was a game changer choice in that sense?
I'll tell you this. I was sitting in a meeting the next day after they announced who the running mate was. And it was a meeting of women from different divides. It was a stakeholders, for women only. And the excitement that was there, that there is a woman that is going to be in a powerful position. This is the first of many, similar to what was there when we had the CJs announced. And so my only worry or my thoughts are, we've had this kind of euphoria before, but can they match the votes? Because it's of no use for the women to be excited, but they can't actually put it to vote. And this is where the conversation of do women vote for women always come in. And they always have that, conversation of women are each other's enemies, which is not true. So this is one way that's going to put it to test. But I want us to remember that during COVID, the nations that had women that were leading them were on the limelight. And a lot of Kenyans kept on saying, it's about time that we also had a woman at the forefront. Now, this is their opportunity. And we have just, sort of left the COVID phase where people can still remember that, there was a nation that performed very well in terms of managing the pandemic. And who was at the forefront? It was a woman. So they still have that. Now, looking at the candidates across the country, number one, those, there's something that's been going around where they're saying people from, Kenya Kwanza are torn in between supporting a woman and supporting their coalition. Because, yes, this is great for the gender agenda, but at the same time, I have my coalition, so what do I need to do? But if you look at the aspirants from, Azimio, look at the women. A number of them have added Martha's photo to their banners, which is very different because most of the time, they never put the vice president. They always put the presidential candidate. But this time round, we actually have her in their banners. And not her and the presidential candidate, but just her. So the excitement is there, but it needs to be more than just excitement. If the women are actually to have their voice out there, it needs to be beyond the excitement, on social media and in different social forums.
Tom, I want to kind of go back to the whole issue of selection really, really quickly of running mates. And of course, this time around, we saw a lot of, selection panels, vetting panels kind of taking us through that process. Even though each of the running mates had qualities that would make them attractive, how much of a role does money, lobby groups actually play when it comes to selecting some of these running mates, in your opinion?
Well, it's difficult without being right in there in the discussions. But we know on the deputy president's side that several polls were taken, a general public poll on the mountain, and also a kind of electoral college among MPs from the mountain. And both of them were overwhelmingly in support of Professor Senator Kindiki. And yet he was not picked. So that raised the question, why not? Some people said, well, his community is rather marginal on the east side of the mountain, not nearly as big of a vote basket and so on. But nevertheless, the fact that most of the MPs who voted in that poll that we were told about are from the more populous areas, because that's where the more constituencies are, it still leaves that question hanging. Was it mainly a question of the abundance of resources of the Mathura MP?
Right.
On Martha Karua's side, again, I haven't heard any reports of abundance of resources. I'm not even sure, because I haven't engaged with those people, to what extent her gender was such an issue. Perhaps more the excitement that's been generated in terms of her strong governance credentials, having served in that position as the minister under the Kibaki government and so on. But just in terms of moving forward, I think we were talking before we came on air, and in the last poll that Tifa did in April, before the announcement, among Raila supporters, men had a 10% gap. That is, there were 10% more men than women who were prepared to vote for him.
Right.
After the announcement, when we did that poll immediately, and 85% of those who said they were going to vote for Raila could also name spontaneously his running mate. The gap only closed by 2%. It only went to 8%. So there was, in the first 24 hours or 48 hours of those announcements, there was no overwhelming sort of rush of women to support the Raila ticket because at least of the identity of Martha as a woman. And we also know from data that when she stood in 2013, she got, at least in the last poll before that election, 1% of the male vote, 1% of the female vote, and she was the only woman candidate of 8. So I think it's a bit inaccurate, at least on the basis of data so far, to say that gender per se is going to be a measurable attraction on the presidential ticket. There may be other reasons, but we haven't seen that yet in the data.
Right. I want to kind of look at, and Ruth, you wanted to respond?
Yes. I just want to add something slightly contrary to what Tom is saying. You know, if you look at the events that happened after the poll, of course not 24 hours afterwards, but if you look at the events that happened on both sides of the divide, there was the introduction of the running mates to the country. So on both sides, they had their running mates head delegations to different sectors, just to sort of, you know, like a homecoming. And if you look at the kind of reception that they got and the areas that they picked, it was very significant, and it was saying something. They were, you know, they were trying to say something in how they picked the areas that they were going to. I mean, if you look at some of the areas that Martha went to, there's an area where she went to, and if you look at ODM's page, one of the interviews they did, there is a young man who actually said, you know, this is the same old, same old. The only difference is that this time, there's someone who reminds me of the fact that I was brought up by a single mother, so I know what a single mother can do. I know what a woman can do. But equally, there are people who, you know, had things to say when UDA went to, or when Kenya Kwanza went then to introduce their running mate. So I think 24 hours was a bit little time for them to be able to make that decision.
We'll be doing another one, don't worry.
I will be looking forward to the results.
Yeah, I would just add one other thing, and that is, because one of the questions you shared with us was about the main issues in the campaign. Yeah. I think up to the time of the announcement of these running mates, and I think continuing, if you listen to the speeches, the main focus is still on the economy, cost of living, unemployment, and so on.
Do you think both sides are kind of giving that in terms of...
We've seen that. I mean, with the Pesa Mfukoni and the bottom-up economics, that is basically continuing. So in one way, the challenge for now the Odinga Karua ticket is whether the addition of her, whatever the gender, whether she can be convincing in addressing that issue.
She's strong more on governance and anti-corruption more so now.
Well, I mean, if you go to NGO seminars and university ones, it's very, very clear, and we've heard it from all sides of the political divide, that there's a very, very strong connection between the nature of governance and the economic well-being of Kenyans, even aside from corruption. You know, bloated payrolls and so on, having all these parastatals duplicating and so on and so forth. So I think it will be a challenge for the, as I say, the Odinga Karua ticket to take her credentials in governance and translate those into meaningful narrative or arguments that can address what most people feel they need the next government to deal with. And I haven't seen that connection drawn yet. Now, I hear Mr. Gachagua basically echoing what the DP has been saying on those lines as he was before he was picked. So they're sort of continuing with that narrative. Karua is broadening it, but the question is, how will that resonate with Kenyans?
Well, we have 2 months to find out, and officially campaigning begins tomorrow, even though we've had perpetual campaigning since 2017. But Ruth, Tom, thank you so much for your time. That does it for Voters Hub tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Let's take a short break here on Citizen Weekend. Much more ahead, including...